From the Royal Navy to the UK Police Force and then the West Australian Police Force, today's guest is a man that knows the colour blue just kind of works for him. Throughout his various services, he has given his all, and he continues to do so today as a public speaker and advocate for mental health. Ladies and gents, it's time to prep your Standinado. I'm very pleased to introduce my guest today. He is the Kilted Rogue Runner, Mr. Jason Nelson.
Thanks for having me. It's a mouthful, that, isn't it? The Kilted Rogue Runner.
But it is catchy. It is a name that people go, what?
And that's why I've stuck with it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because it does. People are drawn to it for that reason. And then, as with anything, once you can draw people in, then you can explain to them what you do and why you do it.
Yeah, I mean, in today's day and age as well, with so much social media, to be able to have such a prominent personal brand, you've got to roll with that, don't you? You've got to keep it going.
Yeah, that's right. And it's one of those organic things that sort of moves and changes as times go, and I learn more about social media.
Mm-hmm. So you were in the UK Navy.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
It was kind of almost a foregone conclusion, really, for me.
Yeah.
Although through a couple of years of my teenage years, I was kind of torn whether it'd be the Royal Navy or going into fine art somehow, or archaeology. But
pretty different jobs there.
Yeah, well, it's just that they're my kind of interests. I love to draw and paint, and I've always had a real deep-seated interest in history. But the Navy won through, and funnily enough, with a surname like Nelson, people say, it's a foregone conclusion. It kind of was, because most of my family on the Nelson side were all Royal Navy veterans.
Fair enough.
Going back to the First World War, and probably prior to that. And even my dad, although he never joined the forces, he worked at a military shipbuilding yard, so
it was very
always
much, it was very there.
So when it came to the time to choose, that's what I did, and
there was no choice really. It was like, guess I'm doing that.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so how long did you serve in the Navy?
9 years.
So long enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I did, and I was an aircraft engineer and mechanic, pretty much the whole time, working on Lynx helicopters. Saw active service in the Gulf and in Bosnia in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And then when my wife and I had our first daughter Jade at the end of 94, that's when I started thinking, well, do I want to do this long term? Do I want to be just a weekend dad? Because my wife didn't live in married quarters with me. She lives in the north of the UK. I was stationed either in Scotland or down south of the UK. And at the time, with the deployments, like in 92, 93, I did like 2 9-month deployments on the bounce over 2 years, and it just takes it out of you. And when you've got young kids and things. So I was back on shore when we had Jade, and I'd been shoreside for about a year and a bit, and knew they'd be asking me to go back to sea. Yeah. And I thought, no, that's it now. So time to sort of look to come out, and that's what I did.
And then you transitioned into the police force. Was that straight away, or was there a
pretty much, yeah. While I was waiting for my start date with the police, I was just working in a warehouse trying to forklift around. Mm-hmm. But I applied when I left the Royal Navy. I applied for the police and the fire brigade, and the police came through first. So, and that's why I went with that. But it wasn't an easy transition. Yeah, leaving the forces. The period when I left in October, before I started with the police in February, although I was still working, civvy life was really difficult for me to adjust to. Really struggled with that, and I'm glad there's a new focus on that with the ADF at the moment. About transitioning out.
It is very much the key that they're really looking at nowadays, and I think that's fantastic. I mean, my dad had a very difficult time coming out of the Navy and transitioning into civilian world, so
and it is really difficult, and it's similar with the emergency services. I think up until recently, once you leave, you almost become that forgotten number. and I'm glad that there's a focus on that now.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I was a medic before I was diagnosed with my own case of PTSD and had to stop working, and it very much was that's it, you're out, cut off, no help after that. So it is fantastic that the government's really looking at helping people with those transitions now, because you're right, it's not easy. It's not simple. And you get all these issues, and then you've got nowhere to take them. But okay, so then you came out to Perth. When did you come out to Perth?
In 2006.
It's a while ago.
Yeah, but it wasn't my first time in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So I migrated with my parents at the end of the 70s to Adelaide for a while, and I loved that time here in Australia, and I've still got family over in South Australia. And there was always that kind of draw to the country for me. Yeah. 2005, I got to the point where my wife and I were actually talking about moving away from where we lived in the UK to either more of a rural setting in the UK, changing police forces, or actually changing countries. We talked about Spain for a while, and Australia wasn't an automatic choice. Yeah. It came about in a strange kind of way. I saw an advertisement in the newspaper in the UK for New Zealand police. They were recruiting from international police forces. So I took that home, said to my wife Emma, what do you think about this? And straight away she knocked it back. And the only reason why is because we watched a documentary with Ross Kemp, which was featuring the mongrel mob, the gang in New Zealand. Yeah. And my miss was like, there's no way, because you'll go over there, be a copper, and you get involved trying to track these people. Like, there's no gangs in Australia. But she said, in that conversation, she said, but if Australia came up, maybe we could look at it. So straight away I was on the internet, had a look, which states and territories were recruiting internationally. Yeah. And 3 were at the time: Queensland, South Australia and WA. WA offered the best package deal, I thought. And I only had 3 days to submit my application. Wow, so yeah. I submitted it, and then we arrived 11 months later.
Wow. Easy. Just pick up and... Yeah.
And I haven't been back yet. Been here 12 years and I still haven't been back to the UK.
Well, I mean, the weather's been a bit UK-like recently, hasn't it?
No.
So was the WA Police Force much different to the UK? Was that a difficult transition at all? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. It was different for me in that, and this is no criticism of WA Police, it was different for me in that the procedures in the UK were far more advanced. And the only reason for that is UK is this tiny little island. It has about 80 million people on it. So population drives volume of crime. Volume of crime drives change. So they've had to change and adapt. Plus they had the years with the terrorist campaign with the IRA. And they're like, so they've had to learn a lot quicker than what police has here.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think WA Police are incredibly well resourced as far as equipment go. I know there has been some change in the last 12 years since or the last 10 years since I've left.
So.
Yeah. But because Perth's so isolated, and albeit WA is a big space, but because there isn't a close proximity to other police forces or states and territories, I think that also affects how you might view change or change improvement within it. But yeah, I just found it a bit frustrating. But I always promised myself I'd stick it out for a couple of years and see if it could work. And then, unfortunately, I went through a period of, 2 years in, I was going through a really dark time in my life. Personally, family, we've only been here 2 years, still, renting a house, building a house, work commitments, financial constraints, and because a lot of the drive to move out was from me, I felt responsible to my family for that. And so I just went through a period of feeling real insurmountable pressures, a lot of which I'd put on myself. But at the same time, I was at that time working on a covert policing unit, and 2 senior officers to me had set about bullying me systematically for 6 months. I became extremely depressed, which resulted in me contemplating and planning and attempting to take my life several times. Yeah. And that was the catalyst for me then leaving the police. I thought, what was I at the time? I don't know, 37, going towards 40, and I thought, don't want to be doing this for another 25 years, working shifts. I moved to Australia for the lifestyle. Can I get a better lifestyle not being a police officer? And going through what I did and my battle with mental health difficulties then, I thought, no, it's time to leave and find something new. So that's what I did.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, at least you had the capability to recognise that you needed to change.
Yeah.
And that probably wasn't an easy decision to make either.
It wasn't, because I'd worked in these very disciplined organisations for so long. I was so used to the routine, and I was also fearful of that transition out again.
Yeah.
That experience I had with the Royal Navy, went to join the police, and then found that comfort again in the police, because it's still that kind of chain of command, discipline organisation. To then leaving and making that transition again.
Yeah, that would have been
off the back of suicide attempts. So it was quite fearful for me at that time. But we made it, and 10 years down the line, I'm still here.
Well, I mean, 10 years down the line, and you are really open about your mental health issues in your battle, and now you're trying to help other people.
Yeah.
So tell me about what you're doing with the running and the public speaking and all that kind of thing.
The public speaking didn't come about until about 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So after my suicide attempt 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and got the help that I needed. Got the right intervention at the right time, got the help I needed, and kind of came good again. And part of that process for me was distance running. Mm-hmm. And I continue to love distance running now. So I don't listen to music, I don't listen to podcasts. I go out, I put my runners on, put my gear on, and go out. And for me, running is like meditation. It's one of the strongest forms of therapy for me. I go out, I concentrate on my breathing, I listen to my feet fall, I get into a rhythm, a natural rhythm, and I just get into the zone. And while I'm running, I can put the world to rights. I can do my planning, I can come up with creative ideas. Plus, by the time I get home, I've got that endorphins running through my body.
You got
I feel
the
really
sweat
good.
Going, yeah.
So, and that was a real important part of that recovery process for me. And then but I still wasn't very talkative about it. I was very, very secretive. I'd come from these male-dominated cultures where there's that pervasive fear, that stigma that
you don't talk about
dampens everything down. Yeah, of course. And so I was very still much a closed book outside my real close friends and family. But I chose to sort of refocus my energy in other ways. So the running came about. I was now working with the state government department, and two of my other friends and colleagues were ex-Walpole police officers too. Mm-hmm. We were all sort of midlife crisis age, wanted to keep up the fitness and what have you. So we came up with an idea of creating a community running group that was free to join, that was kind of managed virtually through Facebook, and we came up with the idea of the Rogue Runners Club Australia, which was established in 2011 in September. And at the time I was raising money for the Leukemia Foundation. My father-in-law just died of leukemia, and I was raising money by training to do the Australian Outback Marathon in Uluru.
Oh wow, yeah, big one.
Yeah, it's a cracker. My favourite so far. So that came about with our 4 founding members of the running club. A year or so later, 18 months later, we'd only grown to 6 members, and we were worrying that it'll never take off. And in 2013, we chose to raise money for a little boy in Ipswich in Queensland who was trying to raise money to get some therapy in the States for spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. So all of his limbs are affected. And so we took a small group of runners over to Queensland and ran the Gold Coast Marathon. But in doing so, we went from 6 members to almost 80 overnight.
Wow.
Because a big, strong contingent of Queenslanders joined us. And to date, 7 years on, we're about 120 plus members around Australia, with a couple in America, the UK, and New Zealand too.
So technically you're a global phenomenon now.
I wouldn't call it a phenomenon, but we are working on world domination, slowly.
One run at a time.
That's right. So that's how that came about on the running side. And each year we chose a different charity to raise money for. trying to raise at least $10,000 for each charity. So, and that's how we went. But after the GFC hit and the likes, there was a lot of fundraising fatigue out there. We were also tired as people, small committee kind of running these events and organising, and and other lifestyle pressures come on. So we ended up choosing a couple of years ago to permanently align ourselves with one charity, and then we wouldn't have to re-energise each year and what have you, and no annual pressure to try and raise more and more and more. So we chose Sirens of Silence charity, which is, for those of the listeners who don't know, it's a Broome-based charity out of WA by Lynn and Ian Sinclair. They're both former paramedics, and after a spike in first responder suicides in 2013-14, they saw a need to create another safety net for those that were falling through the services within the emergency services. And as you know, a lot of people in emergency services are actually former ADF personnel and military personnel. As
you said before, it's a natural kind of transition.
While we were choosing that process, and this is where I'm getting to how I came to become a public speaker, is my youngest daughter, Holly, attempted to take her life twice in 2015. The second time, in a short space of time, watching, it's hard enough to go through yourself, but watching one of your kids overdosing and her eyes round the back of her head and she's in and out of consciousness just really knocked me sideways. But not in initially in a bad way, because you're going through that crisis point, but it actually lit a fire in my belly that I couldn't be quiet anymore about this type of stuff. I owed it to myself, I owed it to Holly, and I owed it to anyone else out there that was really struggling with mental health difficulties. And that's how it came about, essentially. So a year after Holly attempted to take her life, well, just under a year after, we both spoke at an event together. It was a little small event run by living.org. Had a CrossFit competition that was raising money for them, but they wanted a couple of speakers there to share their experiences. So I spoke about my own experiences as a person with lived experience and a suicide attempt survivor, but also from a parent's perspective. And Holly spoke about her perspective as a young person with mental health issues. And it was just really profound, very, very emotional.
Oh, of course,
very
absolutely.
Raw. There wasn't many dry eyes in that room that day, including my own. But that moment there was when I realised that's it. I've been gifted, and that's how I see everything I've been through. I see it as a gift now. It's gifted me this opportunity to make a difference, to really try and break down the barriers to care that stigma holds on so many people. Not just in Australia, but as far wide as I can get that message out. And that's what I've done since. And I still run in a kilt, and still.
You have to explain the kilt.
Well, when we were talking about the little boy place over in Queensland that we're raising money for, I'm always trying to come up with new ideas on how to get media attention, get fundraising attention, and most importantly, raise awareness. So I came up with the idea on the year we went to the Gold Coast to run in a kilt.
As you do.
Yeah.
In the hottest place you could possibly do.
Exactly. It's funny, it's actually no hotter to run in a kilt than it is in shorts.
Really?
Yeah, even though it's 2 kilos in weight, a full weighted kilt's about 2 kilos. It's not. It's quite comfortable. Anyway, so that's how it came about, and it's stuck. It's just stuck. So, and as you said earlier, it's kind of become a part of who I am now.
It's your brand now.
Yeah.
You've got to rock up in a kilt or people are going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
And you wear the West Australian Police tartan?
Yeah, so it's the Napier tartan, which is the same tartan as the Western Australian Police pipe band. They were kind enough to give me the permission to use that. Although they don't own the Napier tartan, obviously it comes back down to the clan in Scotland. But I wanted, because I was running for the emergency services personnel and veterans and what have you, I just wanted to gave them the courtesy of saying, yeah, that's okay. And they've been really supportive of me.
Wonderful.
And I'm always in contact with the guys of the band. So, and if they're playing at any of the big major running events, I always stop for a photograph and chat with them as they're playing.
I'd love to see one of the guys with the big drum or the bike pipes trying to run. Oh gosh, that'd be a sight to see. Okay, so you're on a mission at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that.
I'm. Last year, I spoke at the Stand Tall for PTS conference in Brisbane. Mm-hmm. I was invited by the founder of Stand Tall for PTS, Tony Dell, to come over and speak at the conference there last year. And I was lucky enough to be the last speaker in the main auditorium of the conference. And during that presentation, and that presentation was sharing my story, but my views on how emergency services and defence forces can make improvements, simple, cost-effective improvements to help their own personnel.
Yep.
Especially with the stigma side of stuff, being able to put the hand up and say, look, I've got a problem, without fear or favour of thinking I'm going to lose my job or my career's going to be hampered. So I was in the middle of this presentation, which went really well. As I said, I work for a state government department, and we'd gone through a machinery government change where 3 departments were coming as one. There was obviously a fair bit of angst around that. Mm-hmm. And during the presentation, I thought, I can bring this back to work. I can just tweak it to make it suit. Because my mission, I suppose, what I really push in my one-on-one peer support work, but also as an organisational structure, is the principles of recovery. Mm-hmm. Which are really simple things to follow, but actually empower the individual to choose the line of recovery or the journey of recovery that suits them. So that's what I did, and I brought that back. And since last year, and I had quite an intensive period in February when I was travelling around the state presenting on resilience and recovery, it became clear to me from sharing my story how important it was to incorporate lived experience in a workplace. Yeah. Because it did give people the confidence and the hope and in the empowerment to speak up about their own difficulties and gave them, inspiration to know that if they do put the hand up, they can get help. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I like to dispel a lot of myths around mental health issues. People still think if you become mentally ill, you'll never recover. Yeah. And that's kind of my mission at the moment, is sharing that story, lived experience, and the benefits of lived experience, and incorporating trauma-informed care and language in workplaces, so people do feel comfortable to open up. And that's kind of where I'm at the moment. So I've got a couple of conferences coming up that I'm going to be speaking at. Yep. In August, the Mental Health System Learning Network in Adelaide, and also the 19th Annual Mental Health Conference on the Gold Coast in August as well. So I'm going to be presenting on those issues, but specifically to try and drive towards the emergency service workers and veterans also. So.
Fair enough. So how can people help you to get to these conferences?
Because obviously this isn't my full-time job, this is all volunteer work for me. So I thought, to get to both conferences completely, I estimated the cost to be about $3,975. So a couple of weeks ago I started a crowdfunding page on GoFundMe, and people can find me on there, which is www.gofundme.com/going-rogue 4 lived experience. So going rogue for lived experience. People can make small or large donation, if you like, to that, and that is going purely and simply to pay for my registration at the conferences, any accommodation and return flights, and that will enable me then to be able to spread this message and hopefully create some further conversation to make improvements to the mental health care system.
If you didn't catch that address, we will post that on our Facebook and Twitter accounts as well, so you can go to those for a link. Let's round this out. If there's one piece of advice that you could give to anyone who's struggling with mental health, what would you say?
All day, so one piece of advice. I suppose the other thing I whilst we close out, I just want to add that it's not just my own personal experience which I use. I've actually studied mental health since.
Yes.
And I'm accredited mental health first aid worker, so I do work in the sector as a volunteer peer support worker. I have done a cert for in mental health to underpin my own mental health experiences. So that's kind of I wanted to do that, so I gave the right information. I could qualify my own experience too. I suppose the single most important thing you can do, anyone that's going through any difficulties, is really ask for help. As difficult as that may seem at the time, and as hard as that is, it truly is the first step towards recovery.
Yeah.
Because, and the reason for that is, when you start feeling those mental health difficulties, engage early with help and engage often. It's so much harder once you're further along that mental health continuum. The more difficult it gets, you know. I know some people say, I know about that, but I'll stick that in the back pocket until I really need it. The longer you leave that and the more things you put in your back pocket, the longer you're travelling along that mental health difficulty continuum. It's better to engage early and often, and you're building in that resilience, so if you do have a further bad day or a bad week, you're not dropping back down that continuum as far as you could be. Yeah. And for me, you know, I attempted to take my life several times over a short period of time 10 years ago, and I'm so thankful that I got the intervention and the crisis help that I got. People must realise that 75% to 80% of all mental health illnesses, conditions, are completely recoverable. Yes. You know, and although we hear about the main ones in the media, depression, anxiety, PTSD, schizophrenia, for example, there's actually over 400 different diagnosable mental health illnesses, and 75 to 80% of those are fully recoverable. And you can actually determine your own recovery. It doesn't always mean hospitalisation. It doesn't always mean seeing a psychologist. It doesn't always mean seeing a psychiatrist or medication. That's one path. Yes. Yeah. And then you've got the recovery model path. The recovery model path, which actually gives the empowerment and the strength and the hope and the confidence to the individual to choose how they want to recover based on their own strengths and interests. So that's essentially what I'd say to anyone. Please ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness. It's, you know, we're moving quickly with this now to a point where both public sector and private sector are really in a point of they have to accept that people in the workforce do have mental health difficulties. 1 in 4 in any given year in a population live with a mental health condition. 50% of the population will go through it at any given time in their lifetime, and it's now recognised under occupational health and safety legislation. Physical fitness is just as important as mental fitness. So please, guys, you know, put your hand up, seek help, and as well as the GoFundMe page, I'll make sure you letting the guys know my blog details and what have you, so they can follow the guest bloggers that come on and share their stories through my webpage. So yeah, I had a read through your webpage, and there's some wonderful stories in there from a real range of people. Yeah, and the reason why I wanted to do that was because initially I was going to do a lot of the blogging myself, but I interact with so many people now. It'd be remiss of me not to share their stories because it doesn't discriminate. Yeah. So to actually show from a wide range of different people, you know, from Dino of Bondi Rescue, his blog posts up there, to, you know, a person who I studied with, to my own story, and I've got a bank of other guest bloggers ready to go as weeks go on. One of those stories will resonate with someone. Yeah. And if that helps someone find the growth strategies to be able to recover or realise what they need to focus on, then I'm just going to keep going and keep going. Fantastic. Well, that's what I like to hear. Yeah. It's great to hear somebody who's
he's had an experience and now they're stepping up and they're trying to help other people.
My pleasure.
So people can find your blog. So what's your blog?
It's just simply www.kiltedroguerunner.com.au.
And you're also on Facebook and
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter is at Kilted Rogue. Facebook, Kilted Rogue Runner. Instagram, Kilted Rogue Runner. And I'm on LinkedIn too. So you can find me on one of those.
Whatever channel you're on,
That's
you
right.
can pick him up.
That's right.
All right, guys. Well, make sure you go check out his pages and his website and all his accounts. There is a lot of great information on there that is sure to help somebody. Thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure.
This podcast was edited, published and produced by the RSLWA. Head to www.rslwa.org.au for other content. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast and follow us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook.